I caught my son on the security cameras, plotting to move his in-laws into my estate while I was supposed to be traveling. Once they are all moved in, Mom won't make a scene. She will just roll over and accept it, he told his wife. So, I set a trap for all of them and pretended to leave for my trip. I never imagined the day would come when my own son would betray me in such a cruel way. My name is Margaret Sullivan. I am 61 years old, and I have worked tirelessly my entire life to build something I could call my own. This property is not just a piece of real estate. It is the result of decades of effort, of sleepless nights, of sacrifices I made alone after my husband passed away 15 years ago. Every corner of this place holds my sweat, my tears, and my hope for a peaceful sanctuary in my later years. But 3 days ago, I discovered something that shattered my heart into pieces. I had installed security cameras on the property 6 months ago, not out of mistrust, exactly, but because I live alone, and at my age, you can never be too careful. Jason, my only son, always mocked that decision. He said it was an unnecessary expense, that I was wasting money on nonsense. Now I understand why the idea of cameras watching every move inside my house bothered him so much. That Tuesday afternoon, while I was checking the feeds from my phone in my bedroom, I saw something that froze my blood. It was Jason. He was in the main living room of my house, pacing back and forth with his wife, Tiffany. They were speaking in hushed tones, but the microphone on the camera picked up every word with a clarity that still haunts me. Jason was telling Tiffany that everything was going according to plan, that I would be traveling in 2 weeks to visit my sister in Florida, just as I had mentioned at Sunday dinner. That would be the perfect moment to bring her parents, Robert and Linda Peterson, to live on my estate. Tiffany asked if I would not get upset upon returning and finding her parents installed in my house. Jason's answer was like a knife straight to the heart. He said, verbatim, "Once they are all moved in, Mom won't make a scene. She will just roll over and accept it. She always does. It is easier to ask for forgiveness later than permission now. Besides, she is not going to kick 2 elderly people out onto the street. I know her. She will complain a little, and then she will resign herself to it, like always." I stared at the phone screen, unable to breathe. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the device. Tiffany was smiling, while Jason explained how they had already measured the bedrooms in the east wing of the house, the ones with the view of the garden that had always been my favorites. They were planning to move my belongings to a smaller room in the back. They were talking about my home as if it were already theirs, as if I were a minor obstacle they could shuffle around to suit their convenience. Jason even mentioned that his in-laws would sell their apartment in the city and that the money would help him with the estate's expenses. Help with the expenses of my estate, as if I needed his help, as if this property that I paid for with my own work was not completely mine. I continued watching the recording with a broken heart. Tiffany asked how they would convince her parents that moving was a good idea. Jason laughed and said he had told them that I was delighted with the proposal, that it had even been my idea to offer them the rooms because I felt lonely. One lie after another. Every word was a stab wound. My son was using my name to manipulate other people and turn me into an involuntary accomplice to a plan I never would have approved. I felt dirty, betrayed. But above all, I felt stupid for not seeing the signs sooner, because the signs were there. Jason had been coming over more often in the last few weeks, always with excuses to walk around the house, to measure windows, to check the electrical system. He said he wanted to make sure everything was working well while I was away on my trip. I thought he was finally showing an interest in taking care of me, in worrying about my well-being. How naive I was. He was only planning how to take my own space away from me. I remembered all the times I asked him if he needed anything, all the times I offered him money when he mentioned financial troubles. I remembered every loan he never paid back, every broken promise, every time he put his needs above mine, using a mother's love as a chain to keep me giving without receiving anything in return. That night, I could not sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling the rage and pain fighting inside my chest. Part of me wanted to call him immediately, scream at him, demand explanations. But another part, a colder, more calculating part I did not know I had, told me to wait, to not act on impulse. If I reacted now, I would only get him to deny everything, to invent excuses, to make me feel guilty for not trusting my own son. That little voice in my head reminded me of something my grandmother used to say: "Revenge is a dish best served cold." I was not looking for revenge. I was looking for justice. I was looking to protect what was mine. And above all, I was looking to recover the dignity I had lost by ceding again and again to the demands of a family that only saw me as a resource to be exploited. The next morning, Jason called me on the phone, as if nothing had happened. His voice sounded affectionate, concerned. He asked if I had everything ready for my trip, if I needed a ride to the airport, if I had bought enough snacks for the flight. Every kind word was a lie. Every show of affection was part of his strategy to get me to lower my guard and leave my house so he could execute his plan. I responded with the same fake sweetness. I told him everything was perfect, that I was very excited about the trip, that he should not worry about me. Inside, something was hardening. A determination I had never felt before began to grow like steel in my veins. I hung up the phone and stared at my reflection in the hallway mirror. I saw a 61-year-old woman with gray hair she no longer bothers to dye, with wrinkles that tell stories of laughter and tears, with working hands that built a life from scratch. But I also saw something new in my eyes. A spark of determination, of strength. I realized in that moment that I had spent too many years being the mother who always yields, who always forgives, who always puts everyone else's needs above her own. And that woman had been trampled, used, and finally betrayed by the person she loved most in this world. No more. This time would be different. I would not scream. I would not make a scene. But I would not stay silent, nor accept the unacceptable either. Jason had said he knew me, that he knew exactly how I would react. Well, he was about to discover that he did not know his mother as well as he thought. I had 2 weeks before my supposed trip, 2 weeks to prepare, 2 weeks to plan every detail of what would come next. And while he believed he was executing the perfect plan, I would be preparing something he would never see coming. Because if I have learned anything in 61 years of life, it is that true strength is not in shouting or fighting. It is in observing, in waiting, and in acting with surgical precision when the exact moment arrives. And that moment was approaching. The following days were the hardest of my life. I had to feign normalcy, while inside I was consumed by a mixture of pain and determination I had never experienced. Every time Jason called me or came to visit, I had to act as if nothing had changed. I had to smile when he asked about the trip preparations. I had to nod when he gave me advice on how to pack or what documents to carry. And all the while, as he spoke with that affectionate voice that now sounded so fake, I thought about the words he had said in front of the cameras. "She will just roll over and accept it." Those 7 words chased me day and night, but I was not going to accept it. Not this time. I decided in that precise moment that I would not confront Jason immediately. It would be useless. He would deny everything, make me feel guilty for spying on him, invent excuses, and in the end, I would look like the paranoid and mistrustful mother. Worse yet, if he discovered that I knew his plans, he would simply change them and wait for another opportunity. No, I had to be smarter. I had to let him believe his plan was working perfectly. I had to make him think I was the same predictable woman he had always known. And while he got comfortable, I would prepare my response. The first decision I took was not to travel. I would cancel the trip to my sister's house with some last-minute excuse, but I would not tell anyone. I would let Jason and Tiffany believe I had left just as planned. I would stay at the estate, hidden, watching every move through the security cameras. I wanted to see with my own eyes how far they were capable of going. I wanted to document every step of their betrayal, because something told me this was just the tip of the iceberg. If Jason was capable of planning something like this with such coldness, there were probably more things I did not know about. That same afternoon, I began reviewing all my financial documents. I pulled every paper stored in the desk in my bedroom, bank statements from the last 5 years, transfer receipts, loan agreements, and what I found knocked the wind out of me. I had lent money to Jason on more occasions than I remembered, small amounts here and there that, when added up, reached almost $20,000. $20,000 he never paid back. He always had an excuse. That business was slow, that Tiffany had medical expenses, that they needed to repair the car. And I, like the fool I was, always believed his words and gave him more time. He is my son, I told myself. Family helps family. Now I saw those phrases for what they really were, the chains with which they kept me tied to an endless cycle of giving without ever receiving. But there was more. I found invoices for work that had supposedly been done on the estate, roof repairs, garden maintenance, fixes to the electrical wiring. Jason had taken charge of hiring the people, and I had paid without questioning. Now, looking at those invoices with new eyes, I noticed something strange. The amounts were excessively high. A simple leak repair that any handyman would charge $300 for appeared as $1,200. The monthly garden maintenance, which should cost $150, was billed at $500. For 3 years, I had been paying inflated prices for services that probably were not even fully performed, and Jason had been the intermediary in every case. I sat on the floor of my bedroom surrounded by papers and felt the world crumbling around me. It was not just the in-laws moving in, it was years of financial manipulation, years in which my own son had been systematically stealing from me. And the worst of it was realizing that Tiffany probably knew too. The conversations I had heard on the recordings now took on a new meaning. When she asked if I would accept her parents, she was not just talking about the move. She was talking about continuing to use my house and my money as if they were unlimited resources at their disposal. That night I cried. I cried for all the years I spent working to build something I thought was secure. I cried for the broken trust. I cried for the mother-son relationship I had lost without even knowing it. But after crying, something changed inside me. The sadness transformed into something more solid, colder, more determined. I wiped my tears and started organizing every document into separate folders. One for the unpaid loans, another for the suspicious invoices, a third for any other document that could serve as proof of what had been happening. This would be my arsenal, my dossier of truth. Over the following days, I acted with a normalcy that surprised even myself. When Jason came to visit, I showed him the printed tickets for the trip. I commented excitedly about the places I would visit with my sister. I even asked him to check on the house while I was away to make sure everything was fine. I saw how his eyes lit up when I said that, how he exchanged quick glances with Tiffany when she was present. They thought everything was going perfectly, that their plan was working without a hitch. And while they rejoiced in their supposed triumph, I memorized every detail, every gesture, every lie that came out of their mouths. I called my sister and explained that I would not be able to visit her as we had planned. I invented an excuse about a problem with the hotel reservations. She was disappointed, but she understood. I did not tell her the truth. I could not risk her accidentally mentioning something that might reach Jason's ears. This secret had to be mine alone until the right moment. I also spoke with my nearest neighbor, Eleanor, a 70-year-old woman who lived on the adjacent property. I asked her that if she saw strange movement at my estate during my trip, not to intervene but to notify me immediately. She, intrigued by my request, promised to keep her eyes open. There were 5 days left until my supposed departure, and Jason increased the frequency of his visits. He came with measurements and blueprints. He said he wanted to take advantage of my absence to make some improvements to the house, small fixes that would make the place more comfortable. He showed me drawings of how he would rearrange some furniture, how he would change the layout of certain spaces. Every word was a lie wrapped in gift paper. Every smile was a mask over his true intention. And I nodded, smiled, and even thanked him for being so considerate. Inside, I was counting the days left until his mask would fall completely. One afternoon, while Jason was in the bathroom, I checked his phone, which he had left on the kitchen table. I know I should not have done it, but there was no room left for scruples. I found messages with Tiffany where they discussed the final details. They talked about a moving truck they would rent, about how they would convince Robert and Linda that the move was temporary, just until they found a better place. Another lie, there was no intention for it to be temporary. The plan was to install them permanently, and then, little by little, take total control of my property. I saw messages where Tiffany mentioned that once her parents were settled, it would be easier to handle the situation with the old lady. They called me the old lady, as if I were a problem to be solved instead of the legitimate owner of everything they wanted to steal. I put the phone back exactly how I had found it. Jason returned from the bathroom and continued talking about his improvement plans as if nothing had happened. I offered him coffee. We sat on the porch, and he told me stories about his work, about his future plans, about how much he appreciated everything I had done for him. Every word was poison disguised as honey. And I drank that poison with a smile, knowing that soon he would be the one tasting the bitter flavor of consequences. The day before my supposed trip, I put on a performance worthy of a professional actress. I packed a suitcase with clothes. I left it visible in my bedroom. I reviewed my travel documents in front of Jason. I gave him the spare keys to the house and asked him to please take good care of everything. He hugged me tightly and told me not to worry, that everything would be perfect when I returned. That hug gave me chills. It was the hug of Judas before the betrayal, but I received it with the same fake warmth with which he gave it to me. That night, after Jason left, I did not sleep. I stayed awake, preparing everything for the next day. I checked every security camera to make sure they were working perfectly. I verified that my phone had enough battery and memory to record everything that was necessary. I prepared a small space in the finished attic where I could hide comfortably while watching everything from the cameras. I brought water, food, and everything I might need to spend hours there without having to leave, because tomorrow the real game would begin. Tomorrow Jason would believe he had won, but in reality, he would be walking directly into the trap I had prepared with such care. The morning of the supposed trip dawned gray and cold, as if the sky were reflecting what was to come. At 6 a.m, I left my estate with the suitcase in hand, walked to the corner where a taxi I had ordered the night before was waiting for me. I explained to the driver that I needed him to drive me around the city for a couple of hours and then bring me back, but to the rear entrance of my property. I paid him double what he would normally charge, and he accepted without asking questions. During those 2 hours, my phone did not stop buzzing. It was Jason, sending me messages, wishing me a safe trip, telling me to call him when I got to the airport. Every message was a reminder of his falseness. At 9 a.m, the taxi dropped me at the back entrance of my estate, the one that faces the woods and that almost no one knows about. I entered my own house stealthily, as if I were a burglar. The irony did not escape me. I went up to the attic carefully, so as not to make noise, carrying a backpack with supplies, my fully charged phone, and a tablet where I could view all the security cameras simultaneously. I settled into a corner where I had placed a small mattress the night before. From there, I had a perfect view of the screens and could hear everything happening on the ground floor through the high-sensitivity microphones I had installed specifically for this. I did not have to wait long. At 11 a.m, I heard the sound of a key in the main lock. It was Jason. He entered my house with the confidence of someone who thinks he is alone and that everything belongs to him. I watched him through the cameras walking through the living room, touching my things, moving furniture out of place. He took out his phone and called Tiffany. I am inside. The coast is clear. She should already be at the airport by now. Hearing those words confirmed what I already knew, but it still hurt. My own son celebrating my absence as if it were a victory. Half an hour later, Tiffany arrived with her parents, Robert and Linda Peterson. I saw them enter through the front door as if they were the new owners of the place. Robert was a man of about 65, looking tired and somewhat confused. Linda, 62, seemed more enthusiastic, looking at every corner of my house with greedy eyes. Tiffany showed them the rooms they had chosen for them, the same ones that had a view of the garden and that were always my personal sanctuary. "Look how beautiful these rooms are," Tiffany said. "Margaret was delighted to offer them to you. She says the house is too big for her alone." Another lie. I clenched my fists as I watched them tour my home, planning where they would put their things, commenting on the changes they would make. Robert asked if I was really okay with all of this. Jason answered without hesitation. "Of course, Dad. It was her idea. She is happy to have company. You know how old people are. They feel lonely and need to have people around." My blood boiled hearing him reduce me to a stereotype, using my age as an excuse to justify his invasion. Over the next few hours, I watched as they brought in boxes and more boxes of belongings. A moving truck arrived around 1 in the afternoon. 2 men started unloading furniture, clothes, appliances. I saw them walk in with a huge television that they installed in my main living room, replacing mine, which they moved to a back room. They brought in an old, worn-out sofa that they put where my favorite armchair used to be, the one I had bought with my first full paycheck 30 years ago. That armchair was now shoved into the garage as if it were trash. Tiffany directed the entire operation like a general commanding her army. She told the movers where to put everything, how to reorganize the spaces. At one point, I saw her enter my bedroom, my most private space, and start going through my closet. She took out several of my belongings and put them into boxes. "We will move this to the back room," she told Jason. "We need this space for Mom and Dad's things." She was literally displacing me from my own bedroom. I felt like I couldn't breathe watching that scene, but I forced myself to remain calm. This was exactly what I needed to see. Every action, every word, every movement was being recorded on the cameras. By mid-afternoon, when they had installed most of the things, the 4 of them sat in my living room, on their furniture which had replaced mine, and toasted with a bottle of wine they took from my own wine rack. "To the new home," Linda said, raising her glass. "To Margaret's generosity," Robert added, though his tone sounded less convinced than the others. Jason and Tiffany smiled with the satisfaction of someone who believes they have executed the perfect plan. "When my mother returns in 2 weeks, everything will be so settled she won't have any choice but to accept it," Jason said. "And if she makes a scene, we will just have to remind her how lonely she was before and how good it is for her to have family nearby." But the conversation did not end there. What I heard next froze my blood. Tiffany mentioned that they had spoken with a lawyer about the possibility of me ceding ownership of the estate. If we managed to get her to sign a power of attorney when she is more vulnerable, we could slowly start transferring things to our name, she said. Jason nodded. "We have to do it carefully, little by little. First, get her used to having your parents here. Then we start planting the idea that it would be easier if I had legal authority to handle her affairs. She is already 61. In a few years, we could argue that she needs help making decisions." I could not believe what I was hearing. Not only did they want to steal my house, they wanted to steal my autonomy, my capacity to decide my own life. They wanted to turn me into a legal invalid so they could dispose of everything I had worked for over decades. And the worst part was that they were planning it with such coldness, as if they were discussing any business transaction and not the future of his own mother. Linda commented that she knew someone who had done something similar with her elderly mother. "It is more common than it seems," she said. "Old people sometimes don't know what is best for them. They need family to take control." I kept recording every word, every admission, every malicious plan. But I also started looking for more. While they celebrated downstairs, I used my phone to check all the digital documents I had stored in the cloud. Older bank statements, old contracts. And there I found more evidence of what I had suspected. There was a transfer of $8,000 I made to Jason 2 years ago, supposedly to help him with the down payment on his apartment. But I remembered that at that time, he had told me the down payment was $5,000. Where had the other $3,000 gone? I found another transfer of $6,000 for urgent repairs to his car. But the receipt he showed me at the time said $3,500. I started making a detailed list of every discrepancy. Every time the numbers did not add up. Every time he had asked me for money for one thing and probably used it for another. The list grew and grew. In total, between direct loans, inflated invoices, and transfers with deceptive amounts, I calculated that Jason had stolen approximately $35,000 from me over the last 5 years. $35,000 that I had earned with my work, with my effort, and that he had taken using my motherly love as a master key to open my wallet again and again. While I made these calculations, downstairs they continued settling in as if nothing was wrong. I saw Linda hanging curtains in the windows of what had been my favorite room. I saw Robert assembling a bookshelf in the study where I used to read in the afternoons. I saw Tiffany reorganizing my kitchen, moving my pots and pans to make space for hers. And I saw Jason supervising everything with a satisfied smile, believing he had pulled off the perfect deception. None of them knew that every movement was being recorded, that every word was evidence. that the trap I had prepared was closing around them with every minute that passed. As night fell, the four of them had dinner in my dining room, using my dishes, drinking from my glasses, sitting in chairs I had bought. They talked about their future plans, about how they would fix up the garden, about how they could rent out some rooms to tourists without me finding out to generate extra income. Every idea was more audacious than the last. Every plan revealed the extent to which they saw me as a resource to be exploited, rather than as a person with rights and dignity. And I, from my hiding place in the attic, took note of everything. I saved every recording. I organized every piece of evidence. I prepared for the moment when this whole lie would explode in their faces in the most devastating way possible. That night, while they slept in the rooms they had stolen, I stayed awake in the attic reflecting on how I had reached this point. It did not happen overnight. Manipulation is never sudden. It is a slow, calculated process that erodes your will like water wears down stone. And while I watched the screens showing the dark rooms occupied by invaders in my own house, I started remembering all the moments when I should have said no and didn't. I remembered when Jason was 25 and came to ask me for money for the first time. He had just lost his job and needed to pay rent. I had just been widowed and money was tight, but he was my son. I gave him the $500 he asked for, and he never paid me back. When I asked him months later, he got upset. He told me he could not believe his own mother was collecting from him as if he were a stranger. That family does not charge each other for favors. He made me feel so guilty that I never mentioned that money again. That was the first brick of a wall he would build over years to keep me trapped in a cycle of giving without receiving. Then came the pattern. Every time I tried to set a boundary, he used love as a weapon. You don't love me anymore, Mom. I thought I could count on you. You are the only one I have. And I, raised in a generation where maternal sacrifice was the supreme virtue, yielded again and again. My mother had done the same with my father, my grandmother with her children. All the women in my family had learned that loving meant disappearing, that being a good mother implied having no needs of one's own, that personal dignity was a luxury we could not afford. When Jason met Tiffany 8 years ago, I thought things would improve, that having a wife would make him more responsible, more independent. But it was exactly the opposite. Tiffany saw in me the same thing Jason had seen, an inexhaustible source of resources. She was subtler, more refined in her manipulation. She called me Mama Margaret with a sweet voice. She brought me cheap flowers when she came to ask for expensive favors. She told me how much she admired me, how much she wished to be like me when she was my age. And I, hungry for affection after years of loneliness, swallowed every word as if it were truth. The requests for money increased after the wedding. First it was for the wedding dress, then for the honeymoon, then for furniture for the apartment, always with promises of repayment that were never kept. And when I insinuated that I needed that money back, Tiffany cried. She said she felt terrible, that she never wanted to be a burden, that she would understand if I didn't want them in my life anymore. It was pure manipulation, but I didn't see it that way at the time. I only saw a young couple struggling to get ahead, and me as the only one who could help them. The breaking point should have been 3 years ago, when they asked me for $15,000 for the down payment on their apartment. It was all the money I had saved for emergencies. I explained to them that I couldn't give them everything, that I needed to keep something for my own security. Jason got angry. He told me he was my only family, that when I was old and needed help, he would be there for me. He painted a future where I would depend on his kindness, on his care. He made me feel selfish for wanting to protect my own savings. So I gave in. I gave them the $15,000. I never saw a cent back. After that, something changed in the dynamic. They didn't ask anymore. They demanded. There were no more promises of repayment, only expectations that I should provide because it was my duty as a mother. Tiffany stopped bringing flowers. Jason stopped calling just to ask how I was. The visits were transactional. They came when they needed something and left once they got it. And I, trapped in the pattern, kept giving because I didn't know how to stop without losing the only thing I had left, the illusion of having a family. There were signs I deliberately ignored, like that time I arrived unannounced at their apartment and found new furniture, a huge TV, designer clothes thrown everywhere. They had just told me they were having financial difficulties, and I had sent them $2,000 the previous week. When I asked where the money for all those purchases had come from, Jason said they had been gifts from Tiffany's parents. But I saw the discomfort in his eyes. I saw how they exchanged nervous glances. I knew in that moment they were lying to me. But I chose to believe them because the alternative was too painful. Or that other occasion when I checked my mail and found a credit card statement I didn't recognize. I called the bank and discovered Jason had opened a card in my name using my documents. He had accumulated a debt of $4,000. When I confronted him, he cried. He told me it had been a mistake, that he was desperate, that he would never do it again. He made me promise not to report him because that would ruin his life. And I, unable to see my son suffer consequences for his acts, paid the debt, and we never spoke of the topic again. That was perhaps my greatest betrayal of myself. The silent treatment was also part of his arsenal. Every time I insinuated that I needed boundaries, that I couldn't keep giving them money indefinitely, they disappeared. Weeks without calls, without visits, and I despaired. I felt like I was dying of loneliness and guilt. I ended up calling them myself, apologizing for having been selfish, offering them more money so they would come back into my life. They knew exactly which buttons to push. They knew my greatest fear was being left completely alone, and they used that fear as a remote control for my behavior. I thought about all this as I watched them sleep in my stolen house. I thought about all the times my body had warned me with knots in my stomach, with sleepless nights, with that inner voice saying something is not right here. But I had silenced those alarms time and again, because acknowledging the truth meant accepting that my son did not love me the way I needed to be loved. It meant admitting I had raised someone capable of viewing me as an object for use instead of as a person with intrinsic value. My mother had told me once, years ago when she was still alive, to be careful with giving too much. Children who never learn to fend for themselves become parasites, she had warned. I got upset with her at that moment. I thought she was harsh, that she didn't understand a mother's love. Now, hidden in my own attic while strangers slept in my bedrooms, I understood perfectly what she had meant. I hadn't raised an independent son. I had raised someone who learned he could take whatever he wanted from my lack of consequences. The blame was mine too. I had to accept that painful part of the truth. Every time I yielded without resistance, I taught him my word was worth nothing. Every time I forgave without genuine repentance, I showed him that respect toward me was optional. Every time I prioritized his comfort over my dignity, I built the foundation of my own prison. I couldn't blame just him. I had been an accomplice to my own abuse, out of fear of being alone, out of a need to feel needed, out of believing that maternal love required self-destruction. But that ended now. As the first lights of dawn began to filter through the small attic window, I made a decision that would change everything. I wouldn't just expose what they had done. I would also expose myself. I would acknowledge my part in this disaster. I would accept that I had allowed this for too long, because only from that brutal honesty could I truly free myself. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my right to exist as something more than a resource source for people who never valued me. I watched them wake up through the cameras. I saw how they poured themselves coffee in my kitchen, how Linda commented on how comfortable the bed was, how Robert mentioned he could get used to living here. And while they planned their future in my stolen space, I planned the exact moment when that entire castle of lies would crumble upon them, because I had learned something crucial in these hours of reflection. True strength doesn't come from never falling. It comes from deciding to get up and never allowing them to knock you down again. The following days were an exercise in patience and strategy. From my hideout in the attic, I watched the invasion of my home consolidate. Robert and Linda had settled in completely, acting as if they had always lived there. Tiffany had reorganized my kitchen according to her preferences. Jason spent his nights at the estate, sleeping in one of the guest rooms as if it were his own hotel. And I, invisible under my own roof, documented every movement with the precision of a detective building a case. But I didn't just stay watching. During the hours when everyone slept, I went down silently to the study and reviewed documents I had intentionally left accessible. I wanted to see if they would try to manipulate them, falsify something, look for information about my bank accounts, and they didn't disappoint me. On the third night, I saw through the cameras how Jason entered the study with a flashlight. He opened the drawers of my desk and took out folders with legal documents. I saw him photographing the property deeds with his phone, my bank statements, even my will. That image gave me chills. My own son rifling through my papers like a thief in the night. But it also gave me something else, irrefutable evidence of his intentions. The next day, I heard a phone conversation Jason had with someone. He was in the garden, believing himself alone and safe. "I already have access to all her financial information," he was saying. "The property is worth at least $400,000, according to the last appraisal. She has savings of about $60,000 in the bank. If we manage to get her to sign the power of attorney we're preparing, we could start moving things before she notices." The person on the other end of the line must have been his lawyer or accomplice, Jason continued. "The plan is to do it gradually. First, we transfer the property to a trust where I am the trustee. We'll tell her it's to protect her from taxes or something like that. Old people don't understand those topics well. Once I have legal control, she'll only have rights of use while she lives, but I will be the true owner. It's completely legal if she signs voluntarily. Legal but immoral. Legal but founded on deception. Legal but destined to steal everything from me while I was still breathing." That same afternoon, while they were eating in my dining room, I received a message from my neighbor, Eleanor. "Margaret, there is a lot of movement at your house. A whole family has moved in. Is everything okay?" I responded, thanking her for her vigilance and asking her to take pictures if possible from her property. She sent me several images showing the moving truck, Robert and Linda on my terrace, Jason entering and leaving with boxes. Every photo was one more piece of the puzzle of evidence I was building. But what really accelerated my decision to act was discovering their plans for an event. I heard Tiffany talking to her mother about organizing a family reunion at the estate next weekend. "We'll invite the whole family," she said excitedly. "We'll show them the house, tell them Mama Margaret lent it to us while we find a bigger place. It will be perfect for everyone to see how well we're doing." They wanted to use my property as a showcase for their supposed success. They wanted to show off to others what they had stolen. And that would be exactly the perfect moment to reveal the truth. Jason mentioned he would also invite some friends and coworkers. He wanted to do a sort of housewarming, show off the new family home. Tiffany suggested having a barbecue in the garden, using my pool, turning it into a big social event. The date was set. Saturday in 2 days. Perfect. I had 48 hours to prepare the most devastating revelation of their lives. 48 hours to organize every detail so they couldn't escape the consequences of their actions. The first thing I did was contact a lawyer. I couldn't use the family lawyer because Jason had probably already manipulated him. I needed someone completely outside this situation. I searched the internet and found Theodore Ted Vance, a lawyer specializing in family fraud and cases of financial abuse against the elderly. I read his reviews. He had an impeccable reputation for defending victims of family manipulation. I contacted him by email, explaining my situation briefly and sending him some of the most incriminating recordings. Ted responded in less than 2 hours. His message was direct. "Mrs. Sullivan, what you describe constitutes several felonies: trespassing, fraud, possible forgery if they attempt to sign something in your name. I need to see you urgently to review all evidence and prepare appropriate legal actions." We coordinated a meeting for that same night. I gave him the address of the rear entrance of my estate and asked him to come after 11 at night, when everyone was asleep. Ted arrived punctually. He was a man of about 50, serious, with that sharp look of someone who has seen too many stories of family betrayal. We went up to the attic in complete silence, and for 3 hours we reviewed every document, every recording, every piece of evidence I had gathered. He took meticulous notes, asked specific questions, verified dates and amounts. Upon finishing, he looked at me with a mixture of professionalism and genuine indignation. "Mrs. Sullivan, you have a solid case, very solid. What your son and daughter-in-law have done is criminal. The total amount of fraud exceeds $40,000, according to my preliminary calculations. $40,000. Hearing that figure in a professional's voice gave a different dimension to the betrayal. These weren't just loans between family. It was systematic theft over years, Ted continued. With your permission, I want to investigate a little more. I have contacts in financial institutions who can check if there are more irregularities. Sometimes, when someone is capable of doing this, there are more hidden things. Additional credit cards, loans in your name, accounts you don't know about. Give me 24 hours and I'll have a full report for you. I accepted immediately. Ted left with copies of all documents and recordings. I was left alone again in the attic, but this time with a different feeling. It wasn't just rage or pain anymore. It was absolute determination. Because now I had a professional ally, someone who validated my experience and had the legal tools to bring justice. I felt less alone. I felt, for the first time in days, some hope that this would end well. The next day, Jason and Tiffany were extremely busy preparing for Saturday's gathering. I watched them buy decorations, watched them clean the house with a diligence they had never shown when visiting me. Tiffany practiced in front of the mirror what she would say when people arrived. Margaret lent us this house while we look for something of our own. She is so generous. She treats us like her own children. Every word was a rehearsed lie. Every gesture was cheap theater. And I would be the director of the final scene they never expected. That afternoon, I received an email from Ted. The subject line simply said, "I found more." I opened the attached file with trembling hands. The report was devastating. Ted had discovered that Jason had opened 3 credit cards in my name over the last 2 years using copies of my documents. The total debt was $18,000. He had also found a personal loan of $12,000 he took out posing as my agent, forging a power of attorney letter. The money had been transferred to his account and used to buy a new car I never knew existed. But the worst was on the last page of the report. Ted had discovered that Jason had initiated proceedings to declare my mental incapacity before a judge. He had presented fake documents supposedly signed by a doctor stating I suffered from severe cognitive deterioration and needed a legal guardian. The process was in the initial stage. But if I hadn't discovered all this in time, in a few months, I could have completely lost my legal autonomy. They would have declared me incapable of handling my own affairs, and Jason would have been named my guardian, giving him total control over my life and assets. I read that document over and over without being able to believe it. My son didn't just want to steal my house and money. He wanted to steal my freedom. He wanted to legally turn me into a mental invalid, to be able to do whatever he wanted with everything of mine. And he was doing it while smiling in my face, while calling me Mom with an affectionate voice, while pretending to worry about my well-being. The level of coldness, of premeditation, of pure evil in all this exceeded anything I had imagined. Ted ended his email with a proposal. Mrs. Sullivan, with this evidence we can not only recover your property, but press criminal charges: fraud, forgery, identity theft. Your son could face several years in prison. We can also sue civilly for damages, but I need to know how far you want to go. He is your son, after all. Some mothers prefer only to recover what was stolen without reaching criminal consequences. The decision is completely yours. I stared at that question for a long time. How far did I want to go? Part of me, that part conditioned by years of being the good mother, wanted to back down, wanted to believe that somehow this could be resolved without completely destroying the relationship. But then I remembered Jason's words on the recordings. I remembered how they called me the old lady. I remembered the fake documents to declare me incompetent. I remembered every lie, every theft, every moment of manipulation. And I knew the answer. I replied to Ted, I want to go all the way. I want him to face full justice for what he has done, not just to me, to any other elderly person he might victimize in the future if this doesn't stop now. Proceed with the full weight of the law. After sending that email, something released inside me. The last vestige of guilt, the last doubt. I had made the decision, and there would be no turning back. Saturday would be the day everything exploded. Friday dawned with a tense silence only I could feel. From my hideout, I watched Jason, Tiffany, Robert, and Linda enthusiastically prepare for the next day's gathering. They had hired a catering service using my money, of course. I saw the receipts thrown on the kitchen table. $2,000 in food and drinks to show off with my resources to people who didn't know it was all a farce. Every detail of their preparations was like salt in an open wound, but it was also more evidence for the case I was building. Tiffany spent all morning decorating. She hung lights in the garden, put tablecloths on the outdoor tables, arranged flowers she cut from my own garden. I saw her stand in the middle of the terrace, looking at everything with satisfaction, like a queen contemplating her kingdom. She called her mother to come see. "Look, Mom, isn't it beautiful? Tomorrow, when the whole family arrives, they're going to die of envy. Finally, we have the house we always deserved." Those words hit me. The house we always deserved, as if my work, my sacrifice, my years of effort were irrelevant, as if they had some natural right over what I had built. Linda hugged her daughter with pride. "I always knew my little girl would end up living in a house like this. You deserve it, my love. And it was so easy, so perfect. That poor old lady never found out anything until it was too late." I heard her call me poor old lady with a contempt that cut my breath. To her, I wasn't a person. I was an obstacle they had managed to dodge, a resource they had successfully exploited. The complete dehumanization of someone who had opened the doors of her home to them without knowing they were wolves in sheep's clothing. But what I saw that afternoon was what finally pulverized any trace of doubt that might remain in me. Jason was in my bedroom, the one Robert and Linda now occupied, going through my personal things. I saw him open my jewelry box, the one my husband gave me on our 20th anniversary. He took out the few valuables I have. A pearl necklace I inherited from my mother, gold earrings I bought with my first bonus at work, a ring with a small diamond my husband gave me when Jason was born. I saw how he examined them one by one, how he held them up against the light to evaluate their worth. Tiffany entered the room, and he showed her the jewelry. "Look what I found. This must be worth a few $1,000s. We can sell it discreetly after she returns. We'll tell her she surely lost them, that at her age it's normal to forget where she puts things. If she insists too much, we'll suggest maybe someone broke in to rob while she wasn't there. She'll never suspect it was us." Tiffany smiled and took the pearl necklace. "This is beautiful. I could keep it myself. Anyway, when she dies, everything will be yours anyway. We're just speeding up the inevitable." Seeing my son hold my mother's jewelry while planning to steal it was the moment something broke definitively inside me. It wasn't just the monetary value. It was the memories. It was the last physical connections to people I loved who are no longer here. And he knew it. He knew perfectly well what those pieces meant to me because I had told him 1,000 times. I had shown him photos of my mother wearing that necklace. I had told him how my husband saved for months to buy me that ring. And still knowing all that, he planned to steal them from me and make me believe I had lost them due to senility. That night, Ted came again. We went up to the attic, and I showed him the day's recordings. His expression hardened when he saw the scene with the jewelry. "This is no longer just financial fraud," he said with a grave voice. "They are planning premeditated theft, plus the intent to make you believe you suffer from mental problems. That is psychological abuse. Mrs. Sullivan, these charges are piling up. Your son is digging his own legal grave with every action." He handed me a thick folder. "Everything is ready for tomorrow here. Legal documents, immediate eviction order, formal criminal complaint. I just need you to give me the signal, and I will enter with all this." We reviewed the plan for the next day with military precision. The gathering was scheduled to start at 2 in the afternoon. Guests would start arriving around that time. I would wait until everyone was gathered, until Jason and Tiffany were in their moment of greatest triumph, showing themselves proud in front of friends and family. Then I would make my entrance. Ted would arrive 5 minutes after me with all the legal documents. He had also contacted 2 police officers who would be on standby near the property, ready to intervene if the situation escalated or if there was resistance to the eviction. "Are you sure you want to do it so publicly?" Ted asked me. "We could handle this more privately, just with the authorities present." I shook my head. "No, I need it to be public. I need all those people coming tomorrow to admire what they have achieved, to know the truth. That they know everything was stolen, that they know what kind of people they really are. Public shame is part of the justice I need." Ted nodded with understanding. I understand perfectly. And you have every right. Just prepare yourself, because it will be intense. There will be shouting, denials, attempts to make you look like the villain. Can you handle that? I thought about his question. Could I handle seeing my son crumble in front of everyone? Could I withstand his accusations, his attempts to flip the situation? I looked at the screens where they were seen sleeping peacefully in my stolen house. I remembered every lie, every theft, every malicious plan. Yes, I replied, with a firmness that surprised myself. I have withstood years of manipulation in silence. I can withstand a few hours of truth out loud. Ted smiled with approval. That is the right attitude. Tomorrow you will reclaim your life, Mrs. Sullivan. And they will learn that actions have consequences. Friday night was the longest of all. I couldn't sleep at all. I tossed and turned on the small mattress in the attic, mentally reviewing every detail of the plan. At 3 a.m, I heard them. Jason and Tiffany were awake in the living room, talking in low voices. I activated the audio on the cameras to listen. Do you think everything will go well tomorrow? Tiffany asked with an anxious tone. Jason responded with that arrogant confidence I had come to hate so much. Of course, my mother doesn't even know we're here. When she comes back next week and sees her in-laws are already moved in, what is she going to do? Nothing. Like always. She'll complain a little and then accept it. That's how she's been her whole life, Tiffany insisted. But what if she gets really mad? What if she sues us or something? Jason laughed. A cruel laugh I had never heard from him before. Sue? With what money? Everything she has, we've been controlling. Besides, I already started the process to declare her incompetent. In a few months, I will have total legal power over her and everything she owns. This is just the beginning. This house, her savings, everything will be ours. She will live here as our guest, if she's lucky. If she gets difficult, we can always find her a nursing home and that's it. There are very cheap places where they put the problematic old women. Hearing my own son talk about putting me in a home if I got difficult was the most painful moment of all. More than the lies, more than the theft. That absolute coldness, that capacity to discard his own mother as if she were annoying trash, revealed a darkness in him I had never wanted to see. Tiffany said something about feeling bad for me sometimes, but Jason cut her off immediately. Don't start with those sentimentalities. She had her life. Now it's our turn. That's how things work. The old have to step aside and let the young take what belongs to them. I recorded every word of that conversation. Ted had been right. The more they spoke, the more they incriminated themselves. More evidence they created against themselves. When they finally went to sleep around 4 a.m, I stayed awake watching the sunrise through the small attic window. It was my last sunrise hiding in my own house. Tomorrow, with the light of day, I would step out of the shadows. Tomorrow, I would recover what was mine. And they would discover that the poor old lady they underestimated so much was much stronger and smarter than they ever imagined. At 7 a.m, I heard them get up. The day had begun. The day of the gathering. The day of reckoning. I saw how Jason showered whistling a cheerful song. How Tiffany put on makeup in front of the mirror practicing her perfect smile for the photos. How Robert and Linda had breakfast in my kitchen, commenting how excited they were to show their new house to the whole family. None of them knew that in a few hours their lives would change forever. That the castle of lies they had built was about to collapse in the most devastating way possible. I bathed, using a small basin with water I had brought up to the attic. I dressed in my best clothes, the ones I use for important occasions. I did my hair and applied light makeup. I wanted to look dignified. I wanted to look strong. I wanted that when I made my entrance, no one could say I looked like a woman incapable of handling her own affairs. I looked at my reflection in a small mirror I had up there. I saw a 61-year-old woman who had been through hell in the last week. But I also saw a survivor, a fighter, someone who had finally decided that her dignity was worth more than maintaining the fake peace of a family built on abuse. 2 p.m. arrived like an announced thunderclap. From the attic window, I could see cars parking in the driveway. They arrived in groups. Whole families getting out of their vehicles with dishes of food, wrapped gifts, smiles on their faces. I recognized some. Tiffany's sister with her husband. Cousins of Jason I hadn't seen in years. friends from work, neighbors from the old neighborhood. There must have been about 40 people in total. Jason and Tiffany received them at the door like proud hosts, hugs and laughter filling the air. I listened to everything through the microphones. Tiffany took groups through the house, showing every room. This is the dining room where we have family dinners. That is my parents' room with the garden view. Here is the kitchen we remodeled completely. Every sentence was a lie built on my stolen heritage. The guests expressed admiration. What a beautiful house. You are so lucky. You can tell you're doing very well. And Jason accepted those compliments with false modesty while pouring wine from my cellar. At 3 p.m, when everyone was gathered in the garden around tables full of food, I saw Jason get up on a small stage they had prepared. He tapped a glass to call for attention. The murmur of conversations died down. "Family, friends," he began with a strong, clear voice. "We gathered you today to share with you this special moment. This house, this wonderful place, represents a new chapter for us. It is the result of years of hard work, of sacrifice, of knowing how to seize opportunities life presents us." He continued talking about family values, about the importance of taking care of loved ones, about how they had managed to convince his mother to share this space with them. "My mom is a generous woman," he said with a smile that churned my stomach. "When we proposed that Tiffany's parents come live here, she accepted immediately. She said such a big house shouldn't be empty, that family should be united. That is the kind of woman my mother is." The audience applauded. Some even wiped tears of emotion at such generosity. It was my moment. I went down the attic stairs carefully, reached the ground floor, and walked toward the back door that led to the garden. I could see through the glass all those people celebrating, toasting, enjoying hospitality bought with stolen money. I took a deep breath. I opened the door and walked out. The first one to see me was a cousin of Jason. His expression went from joyful to confused in a second. Then another person saw me, and another. Conversation started dying like waves breaking on the beach. Silence spread through the garden like an oil slick until all eyes were on me. Jason turned from his stage, and the glass he was holding almost fell from his hand. His face lost all color. Tiffany let out a stifled scream. Robert and Linda froze. I walked slowly toward the center of the garden. No one moved. No one spoke. Only the sound of my steps on the grass could be heard. "Please, go on," I said with a calm but firm voice. "Don't let my presence interrupt this beautiful celebration. After all, it is my house. I should be present when my son tells everyone his lies." Confusion painted the faces of the guests. Jason tried to regain composure. "Mom, I thought you were traveling. What are you doing here?" I repeated with a calm that surprised even me. "I am in my own house, Jason. The correct question is, what are you all doing here without my permission?" I turned toward the guests, who looked at us with eyes like saucers. "Allow me to tell you the truth of this beautiful family story my son just shared. I never, ever invited anyone to live in my house. I never gave permission for Tiffany's parents to move here. In fact, I discovered this plan 2 weeks ago through the security cameras I have installed. I took out my phone and connected it to the sound system they themselves had installed for the party. Listen to this," I said, pressing play. Jason's voice filled the garden. "Once they are all moved in, Mom won't make a scene. She will just roll over and accept it. She always does." The silence was so deep, I could hear my own heart beating. I played more fragments. Their conversations about manipulating me, their plans to declare me incapable, their laughter mocking the old lady. Every word was a hammer, destroying the perfect image they had built. Jason tried to interrupt. "Mom, let me explain. It's not what it looks like." But I raised my hand. "No, you have spoken enough for years. Now it is my turn." I took out a folder with documents I had prepared. "Do you want to know more? During the last 5 years, my son has stolen more than $40,000 from me. Loans never repaid. Inflated invoices, credit cards opened in my name, even a personal loan taken out by forging my signature." I started reading amounts and dates. Every figure was a blow. The guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Tiffany tried to defend herself. "That isn't true. She gave us that money voluntarily." "Voluntarily?" I responded with a bitter laugh. How did you voluntarily open credit cards in my name? How did you voluntarily initiate proceedings to declare me mentally incompetent to steal my legal autonomy? I took out the documents Ted had found and showed them. Everything is here. The application to name Jason as my legal guardian based on fake medical reports. Documents that say I suffer from dementia when I have never been diagnosed with anything. The garden had turned into a courtroom. The guests looked at Jason and Tiffany with growing horror. Someone murmured, "My God." Another said, "I can't believe this." Tiffany's sister stood up and approached her. "Is it true? Did you really do all that?" Tiffany was crying now, but they weren't tears of repentance. They were tears of someone who had been exposed. "You don't understand," she sobbed. "We needed a place to live. Her parents needed help. She has so much and we have so little. I worked 40 years to have what I have," I said with a firm voice. 40 years getting up before dawn. 40 years sacrificing my desires to build something stable, and you believed you could simply take everything because I was dumb enough to love you without limits. I looked directly at Jason. "You called me, the old lady. You planned to lock me in a nursing home if I got difficult. You spoke of me as if I were an obstacle to remove instead of the woman who gave you life and supported you every time you fell." Jason had tears in his eyes now, but they didn't move me anymore. "Mom, please. We can fix this. I'm sorry. I let myself get carried away. I was desperate." "Desperate," I almost shouted. "Desperate while you bought a new car with stolen money? Desperate while you planned vacations? Desperate while you drank expensive wine in my invaded house?" The sound of an engine interrupted the moment. Ted had just arrived. Theodore Vance entered the garden with the authority of someone who has the law on his side. He wore an impeccable suit and carried a leather briefcase. Behind him came 2 uniformed police officers. The murmur among the guests intensified. Some started getting up from their seats, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Ted approached me directly and extended his hand. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said with a clear voice for everyone to hear, "I am Theodore Vance, your attorney. I bring the legal documents you requested." He turned toward the audience with imperturbable professionalism. "Good afternoon, everyone. I regret interrupting this gathering, but I must inform you that you are on private property without the authorization of the legitimate owner. Mrs. Margaret Sullivan never granted permission for any of these people to settle in her home. What you have witnessed today is the discovery of a family fraud of considerable magnitude." He opened his briefcase and took out several documents. "I have here documented evidence of multiple felonies: trespassing, financial fraud, document forgery, and identity theft." Jason took a step forward, trying to maintain some control. "This is a misunderstanding. You don't know the whole story. My mother is confused, probably because of her age." Ted looked at him with an expression that froze the blood. "Confused? Mr. Sullivan, I have audio and video recordings where you explicitly admit your plan to invade this property. I have bank records showing fraudulent transfers. I have copies of documents forged with your digital signature. And most seriously, I have evidence that you initiated a legal process to declare your mother incompetent based on medical reports that never existed. That, sir, is not confusion. It is criminal activity." He took out a thick folder and began reading aloud. 3 credit cards opened in the name of Margaret Sullivan between 2023 and 2024 without her consent. Total debt, $18,000. A personal loan of $12,000 requested in her name with a forged power of attorney letter. Multiple unauthorized bank transfers totaling $23,000. Inflated invoices for services on the property that generated an overcharge of approximately $8,000 in 3 years. Total documented so far, $61,000 in financial fraud. The numbers fell on the garden like bombs. $61,000. The figure was even higher than I had initially calculated. Some guests began to quietly walk away toward their cars. Others took out their phones, probably deleting the photos they had taken of the beautiful celebration. Tiffany's sister had her hands over her mouth, looking at her sister with absolute horror. Robert and Linda had remained completely motionless, like statues of salt. Ted continued relentlessly. "But there is more. 3 days ago, I discovered something particularly disturbing. He took out another document. Mr. Jason Sullivan filed a request with family court to be named his mother's legal guardian, claiming she suffers from severe cognitive deterioration and cannot handle her own affairs. He attached to this request a supposed medical report signed by a Dr. Ramirez. Ted paused dramatically. I contacted Dr. Ramirez's office. He has never treated Mrs. Margaret Sullivan. He never issued such a diagnosis. His signature on this document is a forgery. A collective gasp ran through the remaining guests. Tiffany collapsed into a chair, crying hysterically. Jason shook his head, but his face had lost all arrogance. I didn't. It was a mistake, he stuttered. One of the police officers stepped forward. Mr. Sullivan, forging medical documents is a serious felony, especially when used to strip someone of their legal autonomy. Ted looked at me, and I nodded. He continued. Mrs. Sullivan has decided to proceed with full criminal charges. There will be no private settlements. There will be no family forgiveness stopping this. The actions committed here are not personal offenses. They are crimes that could be repeated with other victims if not stopped now. He turned back toward Jason. In addition to criminal charges, Mrs. Sullivan will file a civil lawsuit for damages. She will seek full recovery of the stolen money plus interest, plus compensation for emotional distress. But Ted hadn't finished. And now comes the part that you, Mr. Sullivan, were completely unaware of. He took out another folder, this one even thicker. When Mrs. Sullivan hired me, I decided to investigate more deeply. I have contacts in financial and legal institutions, and what I found is even worse than she imagined. He opened the folder and began showing documents. I discovered that you didn't just scam your mother. You also have unpaid debts with 3 other people, loans you never repaid, bounce checks. One of those people already filed a complaint against you last year that you ignored. Jason went completely pale. I also found, Ted continued, that you tried to sell a plot of land that didn't belong to you, land that is in your mother's name, but you presented fake documents claiming to be the owner. The potential buyer realized the irregularity and didn't complete the transaction, but the intent to defraud is documented. Every revelation was one blow after another. Jason was no longer trying to defend himself. He was defeated, completely exposed in front of everyone. Ted approached Robert and Linda. You two probably didn't know the magnitude of the fraud, but you participated in the invasion of private property. That also has legal consequences. However, Mrs. Sullivan is willing not to press charges against you if you cooperate fully. Abandon the property immediately, return any object you have taken, and sign sworn affidavits about everything you witnessed. Robert nodded quickly, clearly terrified. Linda cried silently. I approached Tiffany then, who didn't dare look me in the eye. You, I said, with a low voice but full of strength, called me the old lady, as if I were trash. You planned to steal my mother's jewelry, objects you knew perfectly well, meant everything to me. You manipulated your own family to participate in this. I have no pity for you. You will face the consequences along with my son. Tiffany tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. She only cried and trembled. One of the officers approached Jason. Mr. Sullivan, I need you to come with us to the station. There are several complaints that must be formally processed. Jason looked at me then with an expression I will never forget. It was a mixture of rage, shame, and desperation. Are you really going to do this, Mom? Are you going to destroy your own son? His question would have devastated me 2 weeks ago. But now, after everything I had discovered, after seeing the depth of his betrayal, I only felt a cold calm. I didn't destroy you, Jason, I replied with a firm voice. You destroyed yourself with every decision you made, with every lie you told, with every document you forged. I am only defending what is mine and making sure you can't do this to anyone else. I turned toward all the remaining guests. You may leave. I am sorry you were dragged into this spectacle, but I needed the truth to be known publicly, so that there would be no doubt who is the victim and who are the perpetrators. People started leaving quickly, murmuring among themselves, some casting looks of pity toward me, others of contempt toward Jason and Tiffany. Within minutes, the garden that had been full of celebration was almost completely empty. Only myself, Ted, the officers, Jason, Tiffany, Robert, and Linda remained. The officer put handcuffs on Jason. "You have the right to remain silent," he began to recite. Watching my son in handcuffs was one of the most painful moments of my life, but also one of the most necessary. Tiffany was also handcuffed. She was screaming hysterically, "This is your fault! If you hadn't been so selfish with your money, none of this would have happened." She tried until the end to blame me, to turn her crime into my responsibility. But it didn't affect me anymore. She no longer had power over me. Ted approached with the eviction papers for Robert and Linda. "You have 2 hours to get your belongings off this property. An officer will supervise to make sure you don't take anything that doesn't belong to you." They nodded, defeated, and went into the house to pack. I stood in the middle of my empty garden, watching them take my son and daughter-in-law away in the patrol car. Ted put his hand on my shoulder. "You did very well, Mrs. Sullivan. I know it was hard, but it was necessary." I nodded without being able to speak. The tears finally began to fall, but they weren't just sadness. They were also relief, liberation. After years of being used, manipulated, and betrayed, I had finally recovered my voice, my power, my dignity. 6 months have passed since that Saturday that changed my life forever. 6 months since I recovered my house, my dignity, and my freedom. I am sitting on the porch of my estate, the same one where that devastating confrontation took place. But now the atmosphere is completely different. There is peace, there is silence, there is tranquility. The things I longed for so much for years are finally mine. The legal process was long and exhausting, but Ted kept every promise he made me. Jason faced charges for fraud, document forgery, and identity theft. The evidence was so overwhelming that his own lawyer recommended he accept a plea deal with the prosecutor's office. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison, though with the possibility of reduction for good behavior. Tiffany received 2 years in prison and 5 years of probation. Additionally, both have a permanent restraining order prohibiting them from approaching me or my property. The civil lawsuit also succeeded. The judge ordered them to return the $61,000 stolen, plus interest and punitive damages. The total amount came to $87,000. Of course, they don't have that money. Their accounts were garnished, and a payment plan was established that will take them years to fulfill. I will probably never see the full amount, but it doesn't matter. It wasn't about the money. It was about justice, about establishing that what they did had real consequences. Robert and Linda returned to their old apartment. They wrote me a letter months later apologizing, saying they never knew the magnitude of the fraud, that Jason had lied to them, making them believe I had authorized everything. I didn't answer them. Maybe they were victims too, or maybe they simply chose not to ask uncomfortable questions because the situation suited them. It is no longer my problem to solve. The hardest part was the grieving. Not grieving the physical death of my son, but grieving the death of the relationship I thought I had with him. I had to accept that the loving and grateful son I imagined never really existed. Or if he did, he died years ago, replaced by someone capable of unimaginable cruelties. I spent many nights crying over that loss. I went to therapy for 4 months to process the trauma of having been betrayed so deeply by someone I loved without limits. My therapist, a wise woman named Judith Bennett, helped me understand something fundamental. That setting boundaries is not a lack of love, it is self-love. That allowing someone to harm you again and again is not generosity, it is self-destruction. That saying no to the unacceptable does not make you a bad person, it makes you a person with dignity. Those lessons arrived late in my life, but they arrived. And although I paid a terrible price to learn them, now they are mine forever. I recovered my house completely. I hired people to clean every corner, to take out all the furniture they had brought, to restore my spaces just as they were before the invasion. I painted the walls colors I like. I reorganized everything according to my preferences. I recovered my room with the garden view. Every object is where I decided to put it. Every decision about this space is mine and mine alone. There is no one demanding, manipulating, or invading. The feeling of complete autonomy is intoxicating. I also changed all the locks. I installed an even more advanced security system, not out of fear, but out of caution. Ted helped me update my will and my legal documents. Now everything is legally armored. No one can make decisions about my life or my assets without my explicit consent. I named Ted as my power of attorney in case I ever truly need help for legitimate medical reasons. Someone I trust and who has demonstrated absolute integrity. My neighbor Eleanor became a close friend. She witnessed everything, and her support during the darkest moments was invaluable. Now we have coffee together twice a week. We talk about our lives, our experiences, about what it is like to navigate this world as older women in a society that frequently renders us invisible or treats us like objects to be disposed of. We have formed a small group with other women in the neighborhood who have gone through similar situations. We support each other. We share resources. I am no longer alone. I resumed activities I had abandoned during the years of manipulation. I went back to painting, a hobby I had in my youth. I set up a small studio in one of the spare rooms. I cultivate a garden of herbs and vegetables that gives me enormous satisfaction. I read books I always wanted to read but never had time for. That time always existed. Only before, I dedicated it to worrying about a son who didn't deserve it. Jason wrote to me from prison 2 months ago, a long letter full of apologies and explanations. He said he had hit rock bottom, that he finally understood the gravity of what he had done, that if he could turn back time, he would do everything differently. He asked for my forgiveness. He asked for a chance to rebuild our relationship when he got out. I read that letter 3 times. Then I put it in a drawer without answering. Maybe someday I can forgive him, not for him, but for my own peace. But rebuilding the relationship is something I don't see as possible. Trust is not something that is repaired with pretty words. It is built with consistent actions over time, and he demonstrated for years that his actions never matched his words. I learned that forgiveness and reconciliation are different things. I can eventually forgive the harm he did to me, let go of the weight of resentment that only hurts me, but I don't have to let him back into my life. I don't have to expose myself again to someone who proved capable of destroying me without remorse. That lesson is perhaps the most valuable of all, that I can choose peace without needing to maintain toxic relationships, that I can be alone without being lonely. That chosen solitude is infinitely better than poisoned company. My life is now simple but full. I wake up when my body is ready, not when someone else demands it. I eat breakfast on my terrace, watching the sunrise. I spend the mornings in my garden or painting. In the afternoons I read or host Eleanor for coffee. Some nights I watch movies I always wanted to see. Others I simply sit in the silence and appreciate the peace. There is no drama. There are no demands. There is no manipulation. There is only me and the decisions I make for myself. Sometimes I ask myself if I was too harsh, if I should have handled things differently, but then I remember the recordings. I remember how they planned to lock me in a nursing home. I remember the $61,000 stolen. I remember the documents forged to declare me incompetent. And I know with absolute certainty that I did the right thing, not just for me, but for any other elderly person Jason might have victimized in the future. Predators don't stop on their own. They need real consequences to change, if they ever change. This estate that cost me so much work to build is now truly mine in every sense. Not just legally, but emotionally. It is no longer contaminated by the presence of people who only wanted to exploit me. I no longer carry the weight of impossible expectations or emotional manipulations. Every corner breathes freedom. Every space is a reminder that I survived, that I got up, that I recovered my life. At 61 years old, I finally learned that it is never too late to defend your dignity. That true love doesn't destroy you, it builds you. That family who harms you doesn't deserve unlimited access to your life just for sharing blood. That it is okay to put your well-being first. That saying no is an act of self-love, not selfishness. These lessons came with a high cost, with deep pain, with scars that will never completely disappear, but they also came with liberation. I look toward the future now, and for the first time in decades, I see possibilities instead of obligations. I see years of peace instead of years of being used. I see a life built on my own terms, and although sometimes I still feel the pain of betrayal, that pain no longer defines me. I am Margaret Sullivan. I am 61 years old. I survived the worst betrayal a mother can experience, And I didn't just survive. I triumphed. I recovered my life, and that is all I need.